All right. Well, this is my second time at NACIS, so it's really exciting for me to be here talking about this. I'm sorry, give me just a second. It is not showing my notes. There we go. All right. So, I'd like to start out to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm an artist, cartographer, and urban analyst. As you can see, hand cartography is a passion of mine, though certainly an amateur passion. And I've also been working on using industrial laser cutters to create 3D versions of the Fisk, Mississippi maps. That has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about today, but I figured this was the right crowd to mention it for. Now, before I get any further in this talk, I want to explain how I'm planning on this working. I'm going to do my best to explain the importance of urban economics and design to you folks, and every once in a while we'll break off into the cartographer's corner. I will take a minute to explain why we do the things we do. So who is we? We're Urban 3. I'm lucky enough to work for this company. We're a small firm in Asheville, North Carolina, and we specialize in urban economic planning. We've worked in 32 states, as well as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and we're lucky enough to have a lot of experience talking to people in power at a local level. So I'm hoping some of what I talk about here will be helpful to you folks. We'd like to say we specialize in telling the story of a city's economics and design. Doesn't that sound fun, having someone tell you a story about economics? Okay, maybe not. But it should be. Civic economics and design affect so much of our lives. The Build Environment and Health Group at Columbia University found that access to walkable neighborhoods leads to lower body mass index for adults and higher physical activity for children. I can personally attest to this. I've gained 10 pounds since I moved out of downtown Asheville. I used to have to walk this hill 5 times a day. Of course, health isn't the only thing good design improves. Issues like housing affordability and access to transportation are an integral part of both design and economics. So if walkable neighborhoods are so great, why don't we have more of them? Well, the answer is pretty simple. The car. America's love affair with the automobile is very well documented, and after World War II, we started to build our cities and towns around the needs of the automobile rather than the needs of the people. Does anyone here know which city was the first to truly adopt car-centric design? Okay. It's Detroit, actually. The first suburbs were built in Detroit, and Detroit was also the first major American city to go bankrupt. What happened in Detroit can and likely will happen to many American cities in the near future. And to really understand the situation we're dealing with, I want to show you 2 different examples, Asheville, North Carolina, and Lancaster, California. We'll start with Asheville because that's my home. Asheville's been around for about 235 years. It was home to a fairly well-named author named Thomas Wolfe, and it is also home to one ridiculously large house, the Biltmore. You may have seen this in movies before. It lays claim to being the largest house in the nation, and it's also the largest private parcel in Buncombe County, which is where Asheville is located. So let me show you what the money looks like in Asheville. This map represents the total value of all the properties in the county. The gray is non-taxable, the greens are your lower values, the middle values in reds and yellows, and then purple are the highest values. And you can see here the Biltmore pays a lot in taxes. But the thing is, the city is actually a land management corporation, and if you look into the law, that is literally what it is. And this map doesn't take into account the amount of land that was required to produce these numbers. So what do we do as map makers? We divide the value by acreage, and we get a value per acre map. This is a much better representation of how well the land was used, otherwise known as urban design. Now, if you're from Buncombe, this is the point where you start to notice that the suburbs and the mall area really aren't very valuable, but downtown does seem to be valuable. But how much more valuable? This is why we use 3D maps, because it shows the intensity. Can y'all guess where downtown is on here? So what you're seeing here gets to an underlying truth about most American counties. The urbanized cores are required to pay for infrastructure throughout the rest of the county. And if we take a closer look at the Biltmore here, it's pretty obvious that once you account for the land use, the Biltmore family is not actually paying that much into our tax coffers. All right, first cartographer's corner. We focus on a few things when we make these maps. The most important is minimalism. We want to break it down and make it as, we don't want any distractions whatsoever going on. Another focus is showing change in a way that's easy to understand. So this total value map is a mess. It doesn't tell you that much, it's hard to understand, but it gets your interest so that when we flip to this, the patterns suddenly become recognizable. Anyone who lives in Buncombe is going to know that those lighter colors are pretty much a population spread. That's where everyone lives. Okay, so we saw where the money comes from. Let's move over to the best coast and take a look at where the money goes. This is Lancaster, California. Lancaster is inside LA County, but it's on the other side of the San Gabriel Mountains from LA, so it doesn't have all the glitz and glamour. It's a small desert town. It does have one thing in common with LA, though. It has a ton of roads. So just like the last map I showed you of Asheville, this is the taxable value per acre map of Lancaster again. Downtown is very obvious. The weird spikiness you're seeing is actually a side effect of Prop 13 in California, which is far too big a subject to get into here, but just so you know what you're looking at. And so Lancaster doesn't have a lot of people, but it does have a lot of roads. We wanted to know how many. Turns out 953 miles. That's a lot of roads. That is enough to pave a road from LA to Portland. So let's look a little closer. This chart shows how many miles of roads were built each year in Lancaster. You can see that they kept it pretty small up until about the late 40s, and the peak was this massive spike in 1953. We'll highlight that. But the thing about roads is they need to be rebuilt. The cycle is usually about every 50 years or so. So we'll show the rebuilds in red. But they have to pay for these rebuilds. How does a city do that? Well, what they often do is annex more land from the county, zone more for single family, and get more taxpayers that way. The problem with that is you also have to build more roads to do that. Oh, darn it. And when you build those extra roads, the next rebuild cycle intensifies. And so what you end up seeing is if Lancaster builds no more roads ever again, this is the cycle they're on. It's pretty grim, right? So you can see these costs spiral well past the city's ability to keep up with infrastructure replacement. The cost of maintenance will continue to intensify until the city cannot handle it anymore. But there's another way to look at this. What if we took each lot, calculated how much a tax they returned and how much they cost the city? We'd get something like this. This is a return on investment model we created for Lafayette Parish in Louisiana. What you see in black is the positive and in red is the negative. Let's take a look at it from the side. From this view, you can see that the positive values, largely urbanized areas, tend to cluster, while the negative values are spread fairly evenly. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. A foot of pipe costs the same no matter where you put it. But a quarter-acre lot downtown is worth quite a bit more than a quarter-acre lot out in a rural area. And this is actually the same map. We just combined and simplified it a little bit and extruded it only upwards. And what this is showing is that the suburbs on the outside of the town are running at a very deep loss, while the urbanized core is essentially paying for everything else. And just to prove this isn't just a one-off, here's something a little closer. This is Eugene, Oregon. We find the same patterns here that we do pretty much everywhere we do this, at least in the US. And what it comes down to is that this growth scheme that most of the country is taking part in is just deeply unsustainable. All right, now let me tell you something. I love maps. I really love maps. That's what I'm doing here. But this was the most effective thing I showed in that last group. It shows the intensity, and it's dire in a way that most maps have a difficult time being. Oh, didn't realize I had the animations on here. And also a little bit of pop psychology on this slide. Just like everyone here, we take our colors very seriously at Urban 3, and the reason we chose red for these ROI models is it's kind of hard to miss. It looks like dripping blood. I mean, it kind of fits the Halloween thing. But that's not just psychological trickery, because those areas are poorly designed, low-density suburbs, and they are quite literally draining the tax blood from the city. Okay. So that's the basics of what we do at Urban 3. It looks like somehow I actually have a little time left, so I'd like to show you a few examples of what you can see when you look at taxes the way we have been. Welcome to Florida. I've worked in Florida quite a bit and actually really love the place, but there's one city I worked in there that really stands out. It's Palm Bay, Florida. Its population about 115,000 people. It's located on the southernmost end of the Space Coast and is home to several defense contractors and a lot of white-collar engineers. And this is Palm Bay's taxes. Do you notice anything missing? They literally don't have a downtown or really any kind of central gathering point. Thing is, Palm Bay was actually built by the General Development Corporation between 1959 and 1991, and every single house in the city is the same. If y'all have seen A Wrinkle in Time, it is just like that weird place where all the houses and the kids bouncing the ball. Anyways, there's something else quite interesting here in the corner. You notice this area, there's nothing there. It's entirely vacant. Locals call it the compound. It literally has a Facebook slide. It's very popular with folks who like to, shoot off of legal fireworks, go mudding, that sort of thing. And the deal is GDC, General Development Corporation, actually went out of business in the 90s before it finished building this subdivision. So now Palm Bay has 65 miles of unsupervised wasteland. Who wouldn't want that in their city? And finally, one last example. This is Leander, Texas. It's the last stop on the metro rail for Austin. The city had a developer interested in building a mixed-use community right next to the transit stop, and that's the sort of construction we really like to see. And so the city asked us to try and figure out how it would affect their tax base, so we modeled it. This is Lancaster as it was in 2018. Lancaster also has no downtown. They let it die off, so the values are remarkably low. This is the first phase of construction, this is the second, and this is full construction. It should be noted that the values we used to estimate this are as conservative as we could possibly make them. Now, we presented these maps before the city council vote and ended up swaying two of the members who were on the fence. Construction was approved, and I love this. One of the council members literally said, "I want the thing with the purple spikes." So, I hope that all made sense. I hope I didn't go too fast. If any of this interests y'all, I would encourage you to check out strongtowns.org, a blog and a website that does really amazing work. They're all over the country. And that's it. Thank you all so much.